of the calendar, and it's a real pleasure to be hosting today Ehud Ahissar, who is based at the Department of Brain Sciences at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel. And his lab have eclectic interests. We were just discussing some of the new directions that they're working on in biomimetic robotics, but has a long history of working in animal models and the neuroscience of perception, and is making really interesting forays into the world of consciousness science, and has this new paper out in Psychological Review on digital analog perceptual duality, which I think will be covered in today's talk as well. So thanks so much, Ehud, for agreeing to come and present to us. The floor is all yours.
Hi, thanks, Stephen. Thanks all for coming. Thanks, Sarah, for organizing it. I'll share the screen. Let me just see if it's working. So do you all see the shared screen?
Yep, that's great.
Okay, so this is a common together with Daniel Polani and Merav Ahissar, which happened to be my wife also, so deep collaboration between us. And the topic is a mind-body dualism, a perceptual core. So what I'll try to suggest to you is a perceptual core for this well-known phenomenon of mind-body dualism. And when it comes from a neurophysiologist and engineer like myself, then I have to explain every time how come a neurophysiologist becomes a dualist. Basically, it's not a common thing in our era. So I'll take the beginning as a short presentation of our journey into the perceived brain. And like everybody, I started in the cortex, imagining that answers will be there. And for example, when I look for possible representations in the auditory or tactile domains, what I found was actually you could explain almost everything. I think many of you who does it has the same feeling. The data is not restricted enough. You could have many models, and all of them can be justified by the data you record in the cortex. So what we decided to do is to go to the input level, to the thalamus, and we trained animals in this maneuver, and look at and hoping that once you know the input to the cortical level, picture will be clearer. It was not. Thalamus is still, although we had fewer options, but thalamus is still thalamic recordings allows you too many possibilities for explaining the data. When we got to the brainstem, it was again in the rat somatosensory system, the pictures start to clarify. For example, there we saw that there are two pathways running in the sensory stream, one focusing on spatial processing and the other on temporal processing. But it was only when we got to the sensory organ, I put it here in a symbolic manner on the human brain, but the actual study was in rats. And these were the whiskers of the rats. I'll show an image soon. And only when we got there, actually, we saw the light as we talked about it in the lab. And the light was active sensing. So the thing was that we knew, like many others, that when you look at how animal perceives, they're always active. But only when we did this tour and went down, we figured out that that unless you recognize the actual forces, in this case, affecting the sensory organ during active sensing, you don't understand the input. And for us, it changed the picture completely. For example, then, so this is the image of the nice rat with the whiskers coming out. Usually they move, they're stationary. So for example, the insight from the active sensing was that the encoding became clear. The encoding, in this case of object location, is done in the rat using 3 different variables, each variable corresponding to a different dimension of the world. The elevation by space, the distance by rate, and the horizontal, the azimuth by time. only when we understood this coding, we could go back in the processing ladder, so to speak, what we call today the brain world ladder, and try to understand what these neurons in these stations are doing. And actually, the most very soon, the first thing that became clear, and we also told ourselves that it should become clear even before that, we only had looked at the anatomy properly. And what became clear is that the processing is done in loops. It's not, like the old book tells us everything, all the sensory signals go the sensory ladder to the cortex makes some decisions and decides how to move. Until today, you can find it, I think, in textbooks. This is wrong. This is not the way this tissue work or can work, even if you look only at the anatomy, because what you see is that once the signals from the whiskers or from the retina in the eye gets to the first processing station, let's say the brainstem in this case, they immediately affect the motor station. There's no switch that say, wait, let the cortex decide. No, the signals proceed up to the cortex, but they immediately affect the motor pathways, so the loops are kind of closed one above the other in this manner. So this was the insight. We call it closed loop perception. There is the insight that for us, describing the dynamics and the bottlenecks that exist in what we call the brain world axis. So the axis that in the perceptual manner connects the brain with substances in the world. I plotted here schematically by these three loops for which the eye or the sensory organ, it could be the ear, the eye, the whisker, the hand, are the center of the loop. So the loops are around these sensory organs. Now, so as a neurophysiologist, we were happy with this, and we felt that, okay, we got a grip on how the brain talks to the world and how it interacts with it. But thinking about perception, we knew that something is missing. And it's clear for us humans that once you think about perception, if I tell you, look, there's a pencil here, then you immediately direct your visual system to look at the pencil, to look for a pencil, and to look at the pencil. So once you have a concept in your mind, never mind how it got there, either you thought about it or someone told you, then it affects your perception, and your perception, you can't help it, is always these dynamic brain world processes together with these concepts or ideas, as we call them. So once we got to this thought, then this was the point that I asked Mirav, who years ago developed together with Charles Hochstein a theory they called the reverse hierarchy theory. And the reverse hierarchy theory talks about this top-down processing, and it tells you that many of the processes during perception starts from the top. Never mind how you get there, either by a very rapid processing of a stimulus or by a word talked to you by some other person. You start at the top. If you have limited time and limited interest, this is where you stop. But if you are more interested in the stimulus and have more time, then the process goes down. Goes down to through this in the reverse order, through the same ladder, but now in reverse order. So you collect more and more details when you go down, and in a schematic manner, and they call it reverse hierarchy theory. And in a schematic manner, I plot it here, just against vis-a-vis these brain world loops. So these are two loop systems that operating in the brain. The implementation of these loops are through the efferent copy pathways, for those of you who are familiar with this brain anatomy. Talking to each other in a kind of interlaced manner. So as if like in handshake, or if you take your two hands and interlace them. So if, let's say, if the bottom of the hierarchy is here and the top of the hierarchy is the fingertip, for each hierarchy, then they talk to each other in a manner that the top of one hierarchy talks to the bottom of the hierarchy of the other system. So these two systems are talking to each other because they have common stations, like the brainstem, the thalamic, the superior colliculus, etc. These stations are common to these loops, and there they have their conversations. So this is where we said, okay, now we might have a more complete picture of the perceiver brain, But since we talk about communication that goes with words, then we talk about at least two communicating brains. And we enter the domain of information processing between the brain, and we ask Daniel Polani, who is an expert in information theory, to join the group and try to address this question together. And let me start by showing you what we propose. So kind of jumping to the end and showing you what we propose about the perceptual scheme, and then how it leads to being a possible explanation for the mind-body duality, and then I'll go deeper into the mechanisms in the brain and talk about their implications. So first, what we propose. There are three observations regarding this scheme of perception. One is that the brain W, the BW domain, the brain world domain, is analog. So all the signals, we know it if we look from physics, we look at the nature of the signals in the world. We look at sensory physiology, we look at the physiology of the brain, everything is analog, meaning continuous and stochastic. There are no borders there. Everything is continuous. Unlike the domain of ideas in the BB communication, which are digital. So ideas are digital in the manner they convey distinct values. Like I say, green, blue, red. These are distinct values. And I also evoke them in discrete times. So they have digital states. They have a state in which I evoke an idea which has a distinct mapping to a finite series of possibilities. This is the digital domain. The second difference between the two is that the analog is a non-reliable domain, while the digital is a reliable domain. And I'll give you an example. If I'll show you this distance, let's say, and ask you either to repeat it, remember it, or ask you if this is the same that I show you now. No, neither you nor I can tell you if this is the same. I'll never be have the possibility to say it. While if I show you this signal and tell you, look, these are 3 decimeters, you can remember it for life. You can transmit it to your friends. This is very reliable signal. This is a digital signal, not only because of the digits. It's a digital signal because it has a distinct mapping to a set of values that we agreed upon in advance. And it is reliable because we have a convention that I'll not transmit to you half a finger or 3/4 of a finger. And the analog is not reliable. Now, the most interesting one for our topic today, for the mind-body dualism, is that one is physical, the analog is physical. This is physics as you know it, and the digital is non-physical. And this is a key statement here. And let me lead you through the reason why this is not physical. It is not physical because digital ideas or digital signals are conventions. There are conventions between us. Let's say when we speak, we have a convention. Let's say that I only show you intact full digits, okay, either 1, 2, 3, or 4. And we never talk about half a finger. We have a convention. Nothing in the signal itself says it. It's only in our minds that we say this, that we have this agreement. The advantage of this convention, as I said before, is that it offers reliability in communication. In communication, this is a reason, maybe evolutionary reason for why evolution selected for this option. The other thing that I want to say about this, about the digital domain, is that our convention that we have in language is exactly the same as the digital convention that engineers put into computers. So when an engineer design, let's say, 2 transistors that talk to each other, they assume a convention that one sends only ones and zeros, only one of 2 levels of voltage, and the second reads this information only in these 2, allows only these possibilities to read information. This is a convention, not by the electrons themselves, but the engineers that designed the circuit. Now, in addition, digital computers are based on these digital states that I mentioned before. A digital state in a computer is a temporal window, let's say, never mind how small it is, it could be nano or less seconds, but it's a finite window of time in which the entire system is fixed, is frozen, nothing changes. All the signals are either high, low, low, high, high. They remain in this condition for a while, could be very brief, and then they change altogether synchronously by some central clock. It's important to remember that no such state exists in analog tissues such as the brain. Biology does not have, physics does not have it. The digital state is another convention that we put into the computers. And this is maybe the major reason why computers can copy, paste, save information. I can turn off the computer now, save the state, turn it off, come back in 2 years, turn it on, restore the state, and go on. And the computer and me will not notice the difference. You cannot do it with an analog tissue like the brain. So, and most sadly, computers can do undo. So I can save 10 steps, go back 10 steps. We cannot do it in life, unfortunately. So brains cannot contain pure digital signals because they are analog. What biology can do, instead of having these things, it can simulate digital signals. And this is what brains do. They simulate digital signals, and these are the conventions that we talk about. So when you and me have a convention to show only intact digits, or to assume only intact in our communication, that I intend to show you only intact digits, then this is a simulation of the digital domain. We have a convention, agreement between us that we have it. The convention exists in the world, it's between us, it's not in either of our brains. The brain only simulates the conditions for this convention. So, okay, and now I'll show how it helps us address the mind-brain body, and then I'll a problem, the mind-body problem, and then maybe I'll pose for a question, because I assume that there might be many comments or questions about what I said. So first, the mind-brain problem is a problem for materialists, right? If I'm a materialist, then justifiably I can be asked, please explain to me how the mental emerges from the physical. But if you're a dualist, you have no problem. Dualism is a solution, basically. I say, okay, I have no explanation how one emerges from the other, hence I'm a dualist. I don't need to explain to you, because these two are two different things, and they don't emerge one from the other. They cannot be reduced one to the other. Our dualistic solution, we call it perceptual dualism. So we all know there are types of dualism that people talked about, maybe the most famous one, and I'll try to maybe a little bit in a simplistic manner, I'll try to map them, 4 of them, in this axis between the subject and the object, because we talk about perception and we talk about this axis. So first, we're all familiar with the Cartesian dualism, which is the hard one, or can be called the substance dualism, which says, look, there are 2 kinds of objects in the world, if you like, spiritual and material, and they are distinct. So the world has different foundations. A second one that comes closer to the way we see the object is a property dualism, which says, look, there's only one matter in the world, but they have different properties, different kinds of properties that are not reducible to each other. A third kind is a predicate dualism that takes the dualism or the separation. Okay, we ask here where the separation between the mental and physical occurs. You see my mouse, by the way? If I point it. Then the predicate dualism take it closer to the subject by putting it in language. So the distinction is in language. And we say, look, the distinction is in perception itself. We humans, we'll talk about animals if you like later. I guess also animals, but to a less degree. But we humans have no other choice. We are doomed to perceive the world in a dualistic manner, in the digital and the analog manner. We have no, this is how our brain works, with these two systems of loops, two manners of communication. This is how we work. This is how we see the world. And so the suggestion is that human perception is dualistic, analog brain world and digital brain. And this explains, if this is the way we see the world, of course, this explains why we see everything in a dualistic manner. I can list here, many things, but, we can start with the brain and mind, go to wave and particle and physics, and go on. Everything that we perceive in the world, we are capable of describing in these both manners, and we have no way to reduce one to the other. Now, the second thing that I'll show you next, after we'll talk for questions, is that the brain executes untraceable transformations between the two. So this is the second claim that is based on what is known about the brain. That the transformations, of course, the brains can transform one to the two, but these transformations are not traceable. And because they are not traceable, then we have what Chalmers called the meta problem. So Chalmers called the hard problem, if I understand it correctly, basically the mind-brain problem, what I stated before. How can you explain how the mind emerges from the matter? This is the hard problem. Then the meta problem is the question of why do we have the hard problem to begin with? Why do we ask ourselves this hard problem? And this dualism explains the meta problem. It says, look, because these transformations are untraceable, we talk about two things, and we feel that we cannot explain, we have a gap. We feel the gap because we cannot trace back the reports, like what I tell you now. Let's say I tell you I see a sharp a pencil. I cannot trace back the processes that led me to the feeling of seeing sharp pencil. This is why we have the hard problem. And this scheme explains it without requiring consciousness or the mind to be an inherent feature in the universe. Okay, it becomes a social kind. It becomes a language-dependent, BB communication dependent, and this is the source of this dualism in the perceptual scheme. So let me pause here for questions, comments, reservations. I guess there should be.
Yeah, thanks. Super interesting. Please, if anyone does have questions at this stage, feel free to either unmute or raise your hand. I do have a question, which is I find the idea of the loops really interesting, and it makes sense to me that there's kind of this distinction between more internally generated top-down aspects that are involved in what we would, I guess, call representation and idea generation and communication. And I found it very interesting what you're saying about how they could be intersecting with the more analog sensory motor level. But what I didn't understand was the rationale for saying that top loop, the brain one, had to be the digital or symbolic representations are non-physical, because it seems to me there's plenty of evidence that the brain can maintain symbolic linguistic representations that allows us to generate language in the first place, and that is all based in the physical machinery of the brain. So I'm just wondering what you mean by non-physical there, and how does it actually connect to the neurobiology of symbolic representation, which we think, yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent. So it's exactly the brain can support what we think. The brain can support symbolic representation, but the representation in the brain are actually all the time analog. Wait a second, I have a Zoom pause here. All are analog because the brain is a physical tissue. So this is our argument. The physical tissue cannot contain a digital representation. Digital representation is an
We are losing you, I think. Oh, you're back. You're now on mute.
Yeah, there was a Zoom problem. Am I back? Do you
You
see?
are back. We've lost your slides, but you're back.
Okay, I'll show the slide in a second. Let's see. Okay, but let's finish the response first.
Sure, sure.
So the claim is that indeed the brain is a physical tissue. It cannot have a digital representation, a full symbolic one. It can
Hmm.
support it. And I'll show you in the next slides, I'll show you how the brain supports these symbolic representations. But the claim is that these are not purely symbolic. Basically, because in the brain you can never find borders. Let's say you assume a symbolic representation of green and blue.
Hmm.
I bet or I argue here that you'll never find the clear border, whatever you look, in the variable you look in the brain, a clear border between anything, not green and the blue,
Hmm.
not anything else. This is the claim. It's continuous. The representations there are continuous. What makes them digital or fully symbolic to say this is green, this is blue, is only our conventions, and these are not physical.
I see.
This is the claim.
I see. Okay, so when you say non-physical, would one way of interpreting that be to say that the the digital aspects that seem puzzling and that give rise to these intuitions about consciousness that you ended with is essentially a cultural convention. It's because we're social and we're communicating these ideas to each other that we
Yeah,
and we end up with thinking that things are we end up with this digital part of how we operate as humans.
now, I'll say there is a, as you see at the end, there's a question of evolution. So the question, maybe the hard problem moves from, by this scheme, moves from the mind-body problem to the question of evolution, how these things evolve. But
Hmm.
think about like the possibility of coevolution. So you have these items to begin with, the discrete and the continuous items to begin with, and they evolve to be mental items like ideas, like green and blue. Green and blue, not the physical structure
Hmm.
of my voice, but the meaning. The
Hmm.
meaning of green and blue is only our convention, and my claim here is that these are not physical. It is a strong claim, but not so strong once you think about it. You see that they are not physical. These are conventions. And then the questions becomes how these conventions emerged or came to be. And this is a problem by itself. And I would
Hmm.
claim for coevolution in this case, but we'll get there.
Okay.
The strong claim is that the digital domain, the pure one, is non-digital because you cannot, non-physical, sorry, because you cannot find in the physical world digital states.
Hmm.
They're not there. Simply, we assume them, basically.
Hmm. Okay, great. Thank you. Jason?
Hi, thanks. Absolutely fascinating. Lots of food for thought. I just maybe we're getting onto this, but I just wanted to sort of ask you sort of head on. So it always seems like our qualia, our subjective experience of the world, is analog. I don't know what you think about that.
Qualia is analog, yes.
How we get to digital, how do we close that loop?
So in our scheme, qualia and subjective experience are analog, are physical and analog. I'll show it in the next slide. Maybe we'll go to the next
Okay.
slide. It
Well,
will
Yeah.
thank
explain
you.
something.
Thanks.
Okay, so let me try to share now. Okay, you see it?
Yep, all good.
So, so let me show you. So what the purpose of the next few slides is to show you kind of the tipping point in the brain where we think that the magic is done. The transition between the analog and the digital occurs. As I said, not fully. It doesn't become fully digital, but it becomes dynamics that can support the digital communication. And for this, I compose here the minimal set of loops that I can think of. It is nothing, all these loops exist by existing evidence, exist in the brain, but there's no guarantee that this is the sequence of loops that actually is the most most efficient in the brain, but let's see how it goes. It is sufficient. This is a sufficient set. So what we talk about is a transformation from substances. I took two examples like sound, what I speak now, and images, what you see on the screen. In the top, two ideas of syllable, let's say the term syllable or the color of these lines that you see here. And these signals are analog in the physical world, and they are also encoded at the first level as analog signals by the spike times. So I'm sure you're familiar with these debates about the neural code and rate code and time code, etc. All of these debates are around the nature of the timing that is relevant, but all of them are temporal codes because the spike amplitude is almost not informative. The only information in the spike is its position in time, is its timing, and in relation to other events and to other spikes, to other neurons. So it's a temporal code. I put it here a periodic one, but it doesn't have to be, just to illustrate it. So this is the first transformation happening in the sensory organ. Let it be the inner ear or the retina. The second transformation is from this temporal code to some population spike rate. So this we are familiar with, some kind of rate code stochastically across networks of neurons. This is non-digital and non-analog. And the third one is the one that makes the brain ready to transmit digital signals, and we call it a near digital signal or digital rate, which is what you see here. So cortical networks have the ability to move from this kind of stochastic firing to semi-stationary dynamics in which you have some few hundreds of milliseconds, 200 or 300 milliseconds states in which the firing is close to be stationary, and then it switches. So if you think about neurons like the Jennifer Aniston neuron in these human recordings, then it's a neuron that either prefers to fire low or high when you have, let's say, the term Jennifer, the concept Jennifer appearing to the brain. And it repeats itself stationary. It's not constantly the same thing, but in a stationary manner, it keeps firing for a period of time, few hundred milliseconds. This already allows you to label this state and this state with a name. Let's say this is with Jennifer and this is with Green. And the mechanism that can move you from the stochastic firing to this partially stationary firing is the attractor dynamics. So if you have, this is just to remind you again, before we go to the attractor, that again, as I said before in my reply, these are not yet digital. The pure digital appear only in the interbrain communication. These are near digital, supporting the digital one. And the mechanism that allows them to happen are the attractor dynamics. So almost every system, it's very easy to think about dynamical system, which has kind of a dwelling point. So dynamical system, goes around about its changing of the input, but it has some power due to some internal connectivity to dwell in certain situations before it moves on. And this dwelling or the states in which they dwell are called attractors. It's pretty easy to get a network to be in an attractor state. These attractors are the tipping points that I pointed before that allows you to move from an analog domain, talking about spike times, etc., and stochastic firing, to a near digital on which now we can label. I can label by education. I can, talk to my baby, show him some input and tell him this is green, this is blue, this is green, this is blue. Whatever the baby experiences, whatever attractors are generated in his brain, he will label them. For the sense of communication with me later on, he would label them, and once it gets to the same attractor, which I never know what is his attractor, but I know that we calibrated them together, and whenever he gets there, he will tell me I see green, hopefully. So this is the tipping point. The tipping point in these transitions are the ability to get to these attractors, and we know that it's there in the cortical network. The second major point here is the untraceability that I mentioned before. So once I know the label, let's say I tell you I see green, okay, and I know I have access. So what we have is in our brain, in our BB communication, we actually communicate via these digital ideas, my attractors to your attractors, okay, they talk to each other. So I can label, I can tell you, look, I saw previously a bluish thing, and now I know it's green. I can explain to you by the order of the attractors that I visited what I perceive. But if you now ask me, how is it to feel green for you? Which means go down here and tell me what you see here. I cannot do it. And why I cannot do it? Because I cannot trace it back. The attractor has many, many trajectories that can lead to it. Once I have the label, I have no information about which trajectory was used to get there. And not to speak about the noise and the fact that every trajectory happens only once. There's no chance that it will repeat twice. So I have no way to, once I know the label green, I have no way to go back in my inner meditation thinking to the trajectory that led it. And this is the untraceability. This is the reason why we feel that we have a gap. I have experience. In this scheme, the entire thing, so we have a traceable domain which is beyond the tipping point, beyond the attractor. So once we have attractors, these are traceable because I have labels for them. Everything that before that is untraceable. They are both part of the subjective experience because they are both physical events, processes happening in my brain. But part of them maybe can be mapped to what Bloch called access consciousness and phenomenal consciousness. Part of them can be accessed by talking to you. I can tell you about them because they are already labeled. And the rest, I cannot trace them back. I can tell you some vague things about what I felt, and it vanishes away. So yes, in the reply to the previous question is indeed qualia and subjective experience are all physical in this scheme. They're all physical. The mental domain is only what we communicate between us using concepts, ideas, words. This is the mind, and this is social kind. It's a creation, or it lives in the social domain, or at least in the interbrain domain. I can talk to myself using these things, of course. I can simulate. Once they are here, I can use them and talk. But the function is to be brain-brain communication. So this is regarding subjective experience and the tipping point, the transformation between the two in each brain. And now I'll add something that is interesting once you think about it. So some of you, or many of you, probably familiar with the strange loops proposed by Hofstadter at the time, or demonstrated by Escher, by these famous examples. You climb up the ladder, you climb up, and you end up at the same point that you started. So he used a visual illusion here, of course. But in these loops now, see what happens. All these loops are interactive loops. So at every loop, you have a place in which you compare predictions with income. This is must be the principle of operation of all these loops. But once you climb, let's say you have the image green, the color green, and you climb the ladder. So you have the activation in the retina, and you climb the ladder up and up, and you get to the level of ideas that is the near digital representation of green. And the next level up is back the retina. Meaning it's not only the retina, it's the eye itself, because you move now you move, or maybe even, change your pupil size, etc. Actively, given the information that you collected so far, and this affects your next input, and this loop may iterate 2 or 3 times until it stabilizes on indeed the green. The brain may change the attractor. Let's say, okay, you change the pupil size, it doesn't fit, and you change the attractor to a different attractor until you stabilize on something. It takes a few processes in this loop in which you get back to the same physical level of the retina or the inner ear, but your mental state is more advanced. You have more information now in the mental domain. And you collect, in the second round, you collect more and more until you satisfy and you say, yes, this is green, and you report it to your friend. So the strange loop in this scheme lives nice and efficiently in this interaction of the brain with the world. So I'll summarize it, see if you have more questions, and then you tell me something about the timing, because I have a nice episodic memory, a short demonstration of episodic memory that will be helpful to understand the picture here. So I'll just summarize again. So we say in each brain we have this complex transformation with a tipping point in the attractors level that allows digital representations above it. The pure digital ideas are only in the inter-brain convention domain, and they are not physical. And probably the reason that evolution selected for them is the reliability of this communication. So we have less information to convey. I cannot tell you what is between green and blue unless we are sharing some, I don't know, professional domain there. But I'm reliable. When I'm saying green, it's green. When I'm saying blue, it's blue. You can understand what I'm saying without being confused. Okay, if there are more questions or comments on this.
Yeah, go ahead, Nadine.
Yeah, so this is super interesting and I'm trying to wrap my head around it. But the thing that confuses me is it makes sense that you say, okay, once you have attractors, you have kind of like a state transition, and then those can be labeled to become more digital representations. But to me, thinking that kind of seems like who does the labeling then? It seems like it's kind of recursive. You're kind of assuming a brain independent agent that does the labeling. So how does that make sense?
Yeah,
How do
no,
you get around that?
So society does it, the labeling. Society, this is the answer. So there's nothing. So in this scheme, there's nothing like, in addition to these two domains, the BB and the BW. There's no, I'll say, an entity that we can call consciousness or the self or something in this scheme. You don't need it. You can add it, but you don't need it. It's only this talking to each other. And now you are entering in a society. So when I teach my kid, this is a green, I label. So, we have this genetic, so it's an evolutionary process. So you have this genetic machinery to label these attractors coming out. But the labeling itself, the calibration, coordination is by society, by education, and teaching and social agreements. Let's say we share a new project with we don't have good words for it, and we need new words. Let's say we use the term computational too often in brain sciences, and we need a new one because it doesn't cover indeed tissue processing. So we'll invent together a new concept, we'll calibrate together, and whatever it will be, the attractor that will sit in my head and the attractor in your head will have a shared label. Will be different, but they'll have a shared label, and this is the way we can communicate. So you don't need anything, you don't need another agent here. Oh. It's only you, me, society, and evolution.
Okay, all right, yeah.
Maybe just to build on that, because I had a question along similar lines. I was trying to think when you were describing the traceable and untraceable aspects, which is very interesting. It also reminded me of this model that Yoshua Bengio has of ineffability in communication. So that makes a lot of sense, and I can see how I transmit the concept blue to you via natural language, and that in somehow intersects with parts of your perceptual space in an analog way. But what I can't quite figure out is whether the claim about things being digital is on the side of the scientist, of the side of our analysis of how culture and communication works, and not actually part of the process itself. So I can imagine, like, I use natural language, my brain produces that in an analog way. you hear it in an analog way, and the whole system just works. And there's no we as linguists or psychologists can say yes, that language has a structure that looks digital and that points out
Definitely.
definite points in space. But I'm wondering whether do you need is that existing at the level of our analysis as external observers of how the system is working, or is there anything intrinsic to the system that is digital?
No. It's our nomenclature. It's our terminology. So the term digital. We do science in the brain domain. Okay, this is the way we do science. We give
Yep.
names to things,
Yep.
and the term digital is a scientific or engineering
Yep.
term that says when we think about things, we as a community, we think about things, we invent the term digital to describe these events. But the events themselves, the conventions are not the conventions made between you and me when we say green to each other. These are not the scientific one. This is the actual, this is part of the system. But the terminology is indeed the scientific one, and all the analysis is scientific. Yeah.
I see. Yes. Okay.
There's
a question in the chat which is related to the same issues and from Daniel. And Daniel, if you're happy, you could to ask it live. That'd be great.
Hopefully you can hear me all right. I'm sorry, my internet may be a little unreliable. I'm just trying to clarify it in my head, and just maybe a little misunderstanding. One of my understandings of it is one of the digital concepts is essentially the idea or the concept of 2 o'clock. It doesn't exist out in space, but it is internally very meaningful to the individual, and you harvest information from your environment in order to inform you that it is 2 o'clock. I don't understand why within the brain of the individual that is necessarily communicated digitally. If it is in terms of, if my understanding is correct, if it's in terms of a sufficient activation of analog systems to cross this threshold value to the point that you can then conclude it is 2 o'clock, that may mean that it's binary, but not necessarily digital, especially as subsequent activation that would be sent onwards within the brain. Is that necessarily digital, or is that not analog as well?
So let me see if I got it right. You ask why the 2 o'clock, the concept of 2 o'clock cannot be digital in the brain? This is the question? Or?
No, it's more why is it necessarily digital in the brain as opposed to when it's communicated on?
I'm saying that in the brain it is not digital. In the brain it has some supportive dynamics that is near digital. This stationary firing that I showed you. Attractor. Let's talk about attractor. You have an attractor of 2 o'clock or of clock of, the hierarchy between attractors is another story. Let's say you have an attractor for 2 o'clock. So the attractor in your brain, you have some continuous analog system that can make mistakes and doesn't have borders, but usually it's affiliated with 2 o'clock. And you tell me 2 o'clock, and the communication went good, and I got you. But I might be misled by my previous dreaming and turn it to 5 o'clock or something like this. It can happen because it's an analog. So in the brain, it's an analog one, but the attractor machinery makes it ready to be more distinctive, to allow these digital distinctions, like the voltage in electronics. Like you have transistor, voltage is near 0 or near 5. We force them as engineers, force them to be there. They can make mistakes, but we force them. In a similar manner, the attractors force you to go to dynamics, which is 2 o'clock versus 5 o'clock. But it's analog. It's only supportive of the digital. That's the...
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll show you a few slides just to address the question that relates to it, which says, look, you have, I told you that the brain world attractors, those that the strange loop is communicating with the brain, and the attractor is the brain and the world. But you could argue, look, we look at the neural activity in the cortex, we see the attractors, maybe it's only there in the brain, you have the attractors, and they don't need the external world to be attractors. I can have a brain in the dish and have my attractors 2 o'clock versus 5 o'clock in the brain without the world. And my argument would be that this would not be possible because these loops work only with the world when the world is there. And Nomi in the lab did experiment with episodic memory in which you can see in action the merging of these label attractors with interactions with the world. The way she did it, she used virtual reality in which she showed different objects to subjects. They interact with them 3 minutes. She sent them out for 20 minutes. She doesn't tell them why. She calls them back to 2 different environments. One is the same as before and one is not. And only then she asked them, okay, what did you saw in the previous episode? And she record the gaze and record the speech report. And here is a movie. See if you hear. So this is the gaze in space when it looks at nothing. It just look at the space. We try to memorize the things that she saw before.
מזלג, קערה,
These are
מזנון,
the reports. Do you hear them?
כדור.
This is in Hebrew, but here is the English translation. So every time she dwells in different points, and sometimes these dwellings provoke a report. Sometimes.
מנורה. מזלג, אמרתי.
The report is close to each other.
קופסה. מחשב.
So this is the way she perceives something
אגרטל.
and memorize from her own attractors and recall the names that she perceives before.
לא זוכרת.
She said, I don't remember.
היה כדורגל ועוד איזה משהו אדום. זה כדור.
Okay, so she had a tendency when she reported the same items, she had the tendency to be nearby, but otherwise she just wandered around in this space and try to recall and kind of dwelling. If you saw these dynamics, going fast and dwelling on places. And indeed, often when they reported the same object, it went to the same location. This is why Nomi called these locations recall-specific locations, which are part of indicators of these attractors. So these attractors that in our language, that they visit from one to the other, is also external location as one of their parameters. This is the one of the observations. And this is the dynamics that you probably saw in the movie. So the gaze slowly goes into some place, let's say this RSL, this location. Then the report evokes and immediately they go out. So the report and the divergence from the location occur together. Now all of this could still happen if you only had neuronal attractors that are not dependent on the external world. It's simply attractors, and the gaze might follow because the eye movements are controlled by the brain. They might follow this internal attractor. So what she did, she compared the two conditions, the same and different conditions, because in these two conditions you have different inputs. Once you fixate on these steady points, you have different inputs coming to the retina. And what she observes is the following. First, a very interesting observation is that the fixation duration, the dwelling time, whenever you look some few seconds before the recall, they increase in duration. As you see here, they become longer and longer duration. Something happens there in terms of processing. This is one observation. And the second, when she compared the same and the diff, so when this visual input is different, there is a clear difference in the duration of the fixation. It takes 50 milliseconds longer. It's something like 30% here, longer to process the information when you have no information there. So it takes harder to remember. It took them longer time to recall when they didn't have the context, and the fixations were longer. So now, if the gaze show this dynamic attractor behavior, they cannot be just driven by the brain because the world is in the loop. The world is affecting. As you see here, If you have the same information, processing is shorter, and if you don't have it, processing is longer. So the word is in this loop. It's not only a neuronal loop. This is a demonstration. So, okay, I'll just summarize our claims for you, and maybe we can open a discussion. So the claim that we make is that this is the source of, this is the dualism we propose, the perceptual dualism. It can be mapped to the mind-body dualism. It can explain it. These analog and digital channels are irreducible to each other. There are transformations from one to the other, but they are untraceable. Subjective experiences are physical, as I said. Mental ideas are interpersonal. This is maybe the strong claim. They're not physical. And this scheme bypasses the hard problem because we are dualists, okay? Like Chalmers or anyone who is dualist, he doesn't have the hard problem. But it does address the meta problem, as I showed you. It admits the coexistence of physical body and non-physical mind. So the mind is a social kind, is our convention. This is the mind. Of course, I mean, I'm using, it may sound too superficial, too restrictive or too simplistic. Okay, this is just in order to make the distinctions clear using our BB conventions. But of course, it's, I mean, the mind is more than only just conventions, for example, but these are the basic of the mental world. And we don't need the mental foundation to be another foundation in the universe. It's only a social kind. It's only, you need society for it. And maybe the happy news, one happy news from it is that if any one of us is feel intimidated by AI getting control of our life, then it's limited only to the BB domain. AI is not yet. Robotics is no way close to what AI does in the BB domain. Robotics in the analog domain is not there. So we have no reason to be afraid of this. So yes, I think, okay, this is a good summary. And as I said, the question moves here to coevolution, if anyone wants to talk about it. So the hard problem, so we said we had this, I mean, all this situation when we come to think about these things, raise the hard problem to say, how can I explain my physical feelings? Once you explain it by dualism, then you have to explain the dualism, and the two possibilities are, one, that you have coevolution. I have a summary slide here. One is that they were co-evolved. The physical and the digital domains were co-evolved. We can talk about it if you like. And the second is that we have another hard problem, which is to explain how a digital can emerge from the physical, or vice versa, if you believe in creation stories. But to explain it is a hard problem. It's not easy to show how from an analog tissue, analog universe, pops up this convention between digital agents. So, okay, I'll stop here with this summary slide, I think.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Ehud. That's extremely thought-provoking. So let's unmute if you wish, or give a virtual round of applause.
Thank you.